helping us out with Zoom and making sure that everything's tight and neat and tidy. So she's going to be taking on, well, why don't you say it? You want to speak, Sarah?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm just here doing a little tech support for Craig and Debbie. So I will be monitoring the chat box as well as muting any back noise I hear throughout the call. So if you have any questions for Craig or Debbie at any point, please feel free to pop them in the chat box and I will interject them throughout the conversation. So excited to be here with all of you.
Also, at the last 10 minutes, we are open to having a conversation with anyone who would like to present an issue or a problem or a concern they're having in their relationship, or either together or alone. And we're happy to work with you, but it would be live and it would be on video, so everybody would be watching. So we want to put that out there in case anybody's interested and open to doing that. It could be about tonight's session, or it could be on some other topic. So just want to put that out there. It's available at the last 10 minutes. So good. Should we get started?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So tonight we're talking about something near and dear to both of our hearts, and that is the power of positivity. And I was thinking, today, like, how do we even talk about positivity? Actually, when I think about positivity, I think about, like, I was doing management consulting back in the 70s and 80s, and it had a good rap, and then all of a sudden it had a bad rap, like, oh, positivity. And I think it got a bad rap because people didn't really understand it. And in many cases, it was used as a little bit of a manipulation. Like, I remember teaching executives how to give performance appraisals. And one of the techniques we had that we actually taught was you give them something nice, you tell them something nice about them, and then you give them the truth, something that they need to correct, and then you tell them something nice again. And we used to kind of laugh about it and call it a shit-filled Twinkie, because that's what it felt like. And so I think that was one of the many reasons why positivity kind of went down the tubes for a while. And the reason that didn't work is because it was used as a manipulation. So if I tell you something positive, then you can digest the negative. But the problem is that they didn't really feel it in their hearts. They used it as a tool to make what they wanted to land, and it never really worked. And but the reality is that positivity, I think, is the essence of when we're able to enter into that zone. It's where life really happens. It's where joy comes from. It's where appreciation is. It's, we are big believers of the law of attraction. The law of attraction says what you focus on expands. And so when I am positive, I'm in a positive state of mind, then all the people that are positive and all the things that are positive come naturally to me. And why that is a state of resistance. So really, to understand, I think, positivity, you've got to understand its close cousin, not close cousin, but the opposite of it, and that's negativity. And we were talking about, like, what to talk about today, and we said, let's not talk about anything negative, but I think really to understand a concept, you always have to understand its opposite. And so when we're negative, we're in a state of resistance. And when we're in a state of resistance, we're tight, and our focus is very narrow. And so the problem here is that we're biologically wired to be negative. That's why we struggle so much with being positive. And the reason we're biologically wired to be negative is because, the saber-toothed tiger thing. It was for survival, only we've carried it with us. And so when we see a perceived threat, we go negative. Not all of us, not all the time, but we're wired to do that. And the problem with going negative is, again, we get narrow and tight, and all we see is this very narrow scope of reality. A related example is, you and I, we lose things a lot, right? Like, where's my water? Where's my coffee? Where are my keys? It's part of aging, I think, hopefully. But anyhow, so when that happens to either or both of us, we get into a state of tightness and resistance, and nothing good happens. We don't find the coffee, the water, the keys. We can't find anything. And we just get in that rotten mood, right? Mm-hmm. But we've realized that when we relax and we say, you know what, it's going to show up. It's not a big deal. And then the other one kind of helps out and says, you'll find it. No big deal. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, I'm looking down the desk and there it is. Why? Because I've opened up my awareness, because I'm not in a state of survival and fear and tightness and resistance, but I've let go. And when I let go, things come to me that I want. And so today we're going to be talking about the power of positivity, because again, it really is everything. Anything that we want in life, when we maintain a positive outlook, they tend to attract to us. It's called the law of attraction.
Yeah.
The law of attraction says what I focus on tends to expand.
So if you focus on negative, you're going to get more negative. If you focus on positive, you're going to get more positive. It's just the way it works. It seems a natural law of the universe almost. So we want to talk about it within the context of relationships tonight. We want to discuss how positivity gets placed into the relationship. So the more and more you have of it, the better your relationship's going to be. And John Gottman likes to use the word survivors and thrivers. He talks about relationships in those terms. And he says that the thrivers, the relationships that thrive, absolutely have a ton more positivity in their relationship than negativity. And as Debbie was saying, because the default mode tends to be towards the negative, in other words, we look for what's wrong with our partner. We look for what's not going well. We tend to focus on that. We get more of that. But Gottman likes to say that if you focus on the positive, you're going to get more of that. And he actually came up with a mathematical formula, which is quite fantastic because he was a mathematician and he's a world-renowned relationship therapist now, but he started off as a mathematician, so he really likes data and statistics. And the statistics he came up with, he noticed that those who had a really positive relationship had about a 6-to-1 ratio, which means for every negative that they had in their relationship, they had 6 positives that outweighed the negative. The negative is so powerful in a relationship. When you have an argument and a disagreement and it doesn't get resolved, it just sits there and builds and resentment builds, that is so powerful that it can outweigh a lot of the negative. So Debbie and I like to talk about, Debbie, actually, you introduced me to this concept of the emotional bank account. Maybe you can mention that before we move on.
Well, the emotional bank account is something that those of you who are a little bit older probably know about because it was written can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. It was developed by somebody by the name of Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And basically the emotional bank account is brilliant. It has to do with deposits and withdrawals. So if I do something positive for you, it's a deposit. And if I do something negative like yell or scream or, turn down a bid, then it's a negative. And we want to keep it balanced. We want more positive than negative. The interesting thing about the emotional bank account that I love is that you have to know what a deposit is for your spouse. And I've always told Craig, I'm not a big flowers person, so bringing home flowers isn't a deposit. It may be for him, he actually likes flowers, but I don't. And I like orchids. So if he brings home an orchid, it's a deposit. If he brings some regular flowers, not so much.
Yeah. So any negative thing that you do in a relationship is going to be withdrawal. So like any bank account, you want to have a lot of money in the bank, basically, so that
anything negative that the other person perceives.
That the other person perceives. Yeah, negativity is defined as whatever your partner perceives as negative. You don't get to tell your partner what's negative. They get to tell you if it's perceived that way. So anything that they perceive as negative is going to be negative. You need enough money in your bank account to be able to offset that withdrawal that comes when you have an argument or a disagreement that does not get resolved. And I quote, does not get resolved, because one of the main characteristics of couples that thrive is that they resolve arguments. They, what we call, repair the argument. There's nothing wrong with an argument. Everybody argues. Every couple I know argues. It's normal. It's expected. Repairing the argument is what makes the thrivers from the survivors. So that's what Gottman likes to say.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about, it's kind of a free-flowing conversation, as you can see. But we want to talk about positivity, the power of it, and also what you can do as individuals or as couples to accentuate it in your relationship. And we talk about the power of positivity, and it may seem kind of like common sense, but it's amazing how powerful it is because it affects everything. And again, right now we're faced with coronavirus. We're all concerned about our health. And we're finding more and more every day, the research shows that when we're stressed out, when we're negative, when we're in a state of stress and resistance, our immune system goes down. And so does our overall state of happiness and joy, of course. And so there's a huge effect, not only on our health, but on our relationships. Because if I'm in a negative state, then I can't really connect. I'm too worried about being negative. So it's hugely important. And we're going to talk about like, how do you develop it? Because a lot of people will say to us, well, it sounds great, be positive, but I can't because there's so many things that bother me.
And one of the things that I love about the work we do is that Debbie and I are very pragmatic. We really believe in practical ways to integrate positivity into your relationship. So we have a couple of tools we want to share with you tonight that are really powerful, really, really powerful, and yet so simple. And Debbie, I think you're going to start off by talking about one of those tools. And just as we're talking about these tools, do you have a question? Sarah has a question.
We do have a question.
Okay.
So a great question. Can you share tips on how to repair the argument before we proceed?
Perfect.
Yeah. You want me to jump in with
Okay.
that first? Okay. I'm not going to take a long time of this because this could be a whole talk unto itself, right? We really should be addressing it. We will address it in a future session for sure. But just to the question of how do you repair an argument? It's so important that after you argue, after you have an argument that feels unsettled, that you get back to it with cool minds. Everybody's calmed down. You're not as triggered. You've been able to self-soothe. Your partner's feeling more calm. And then you come back together and you have to continue the conversation. It's no good to have an argument, have a major disagreement and not talk about it for 4 days. And 4 days later, it's still sitting there and you're resentful, because resentment is simply lots and lots of arguments that never get resolved, get swept under the carpet. So we have to get back to the argument. We've got to talk it through. And we may not come to a solution that everybody's happy with, but at least each person has to feel heard, listened to, validated, and some empathy has to be there. And we can have a whole session on how to have that conversation. We've talked about it in the past, about mirroring, validating, empathizing. So the main point I want to say about repair is that we have to get back to the argument if it feels unsettling and continue to talk about it. You may again need to take a time out, take a break, but you got to come back to it until it's resolved.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that is when you're in a state of frustration, anger, or resentment, or any of those states, that's not the time to have an argument. I mean, a repair conversation, because nothing good happens. I call it the muck. And when you're in the muck, you should just kind of like try and get out of it, try and rest, and not get out of that resistant state, because anything that you do in that state of mind is not going to go so well. So that's why taking a little bit of a break, and we've gotten into little arguments. It's like, let's just do this tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about it tomorrow, because I care about this.
Yeah.
And I want to do it when I'm in a better mood.
Right.
So that's really restorative. Also, not to promote our book, but our book happens to have some stuff on repair. We talk about, I think it does, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We talk about what it is, how to do it, and then some exercises for you to follow.
So we're gonna shift to this concept of one of the techniques, or one of the practices, I like to call it, for a really healthy relationship in terms of positivity, is appreciations or gratitude. So we want to spend a little bit of time about why is gratitude and appreciations not sort of the bread and butter of our relationships, why it should be, what gets in the way, and how to do a real good, solid appreciation.
Yeah, so I think, your question about what gets in the way is a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know for me, I grew up with, my dad was from Poland, and he came here when he was young and went into World War II and just led a really hard life. And his whole thing was survival.
Mm.
And then my mom came from, kind of a religious background. And I just never saw them giving each other appreciations.
Mm.
And so it wasn't part of my repertoire. When I grew up, it wasn't something that I did naturally.
Mm.
And I think that carried through to all of my relationships. And it wasn't like I didn't appreciate people. It's just that I wasn't really good verbalizing it because I didn't have good role models. So that's one thing that can get in the way. And then when I met him, and he's like, all studied up on Imago, and he took it very seriously. And so he wanted to do daily appreciations, which at first when I heard him, like, so what's one thing you appreciate about me today? It's like, are you serious? Like we're going to do this every night. And so I had some resistance to it because it was so foreign to me. But one of the things that I realized doing it through the years is I've gone from being resistant to it and thinking it's a little bit corny to really, like, if we don't do it, I can feel the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so appreciations are important because, as we talked about earlier, like we don't naturally focus on the positive. We naturally focus on the negative. And so having a ritual of talking about appreciations is one way that we can make sure that we're focusing on the positive on a regular basis. And so my daughter, how do you being positive when your daughter slams the door? She's adorable. Not cute. Anyhow, so that's one of the benefits, I think, is of having a ritualized appreciation. So what is
Absolutely.
it? So what we do.
Before we go into
Yes.
that, I just want to say, and I do want to hear about how we do it.
Yeah.
It's critical. But I want to talk a little bit just briefly about why it's so difficult for so many people. I'm amazed when we're in therapy. One of the biggest complaints we hear from almost all our couples, both partners, is I don't feel appreciated. It's a very common complaint that we hear in sessions. There's a lot of reasons, I think, why couples don't give appreciations to each other. And one, and not the least of which, is that we did, as Debbie was saying, we didn't get them when we were younger. We may have grown up in a family where, we never heard "I love you," or we never heard, "Wow, that's great," that, real positive affirmations or gratitude for things that you have been doing or are doing. So if you didn't grow up in a family that was appreciative towards you and towards each other, then it's alien to you. And you come into a relationship, a marriage, and you marry somebody who really wants to receive that, but you don't know how to give it.
Well, it's not so much you don't know how to give it. I think what happens, like in my case and in many cases I've seen, is that the foundation is that it's not necessary. Like if there's a problem, I'll tell you. So appreciations are kind of like just non-essential. And so I don't need to give you, everything's fine. If there was a problem, I would let you know. And that's the underlying belief.
So we don't really, it doesn't occur to us to give an appreciation.
It doesn't occur because it seems non-essential. But I think that's kind of a rationalization. It's also, we just don't know how to do it. It feels foreign and awkward.
It does. And sometimes if you have a partner who doesn't know how to receive the appreciation, because it's one thing to give one, it's another thing to receive one. If you have a partner who's a little bit, never received them when they were young and they're not really comfortable with it, and you give one and they close down to your giving it, then it's going to be hard for you to continue to give them. So it takes two to tango, and we have to have a receiver who's going to receive that appreciation, be completely open to it, as well as one who's giving that.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because what could happen in couplehood is that I'm a pretty good giver. So I give you an appreciation. And if you're a terrible receiver, I may lose my motivation. So every time I give you an appreciation, you say, nah, it's nothing. I'm not.
Exactly.
And I kind of brush it off. Then it's like, well, he doesn't really appreciate my appreciation, so I'll just stop. So there's a lot of reasons why we don't. I think another reason could be, if I appreciate you for doing something, I kind of feel maybe you'll stop. And that seems kind of counterintuitive, but not so much stop, but then it's like, there may be in somebody's mind a balancing out. So if I appreciate you for doing the dishes, then it's like, yeah, I did the dishes, and what about, maybe you can make the bed.
Right.
So
There's an expectation.
Yeah. So we don't want to go in that territory,
Right.
but it's a false story that we tell ourselves.
But one last thing, and then we're going to teach a beautiful technique. But
before we do, Sarah, do you have a question?
Yeah. Craig, can you speak up just a little bit?
Yeah, I'll speak up.
Perfect.
For sure.
And then we have a request. Can you give a couple of examples on how to give an appreciation?
That's what we're going to do right
now. That's what we're going to do.
Not silly.
1 second though, I just want to say one other thing. What I've noticed, as I mentioned, that a lot of couples say when they come in, they don't feel appreciated by their partner. I will say it's not because the partner doesn't necessarily appreciate their partner, but it's because they don't say it, or they don't tell them. So, I can be feeling it. I can be feeling appreciative for my partner, but if I don't get it out of my mouth and say something, then they may not know that. They may not experience my appreciation. I like to say it's like the Swedish farmer. He loved his wife so much that one day he almost told her. So you don't want to be like that. You want to we have a mouth, we want to get those words out of the mouth. We want to tell our partners what we appreciate about them. And I guarantee you, as simple as this is going to sound when Debbie explains it, it can transform the whole energy of your relationship bit by bit.
Yeah. I want to say one more thing. Well, I'll put it off. Let's answer this question because it's a good one.
And we got to go to caring behaviors.
Okay. So how to do it. It's really simple. It's like one thing that you did today that I really appreciated. And if you don't do appreciations every day, then you could say, one thing you did recently that I really appreciated was, and then you're pretty explicit about that. And it doesn't have to be just like 2 words, like you took out the trash. It could be something like, one thing I appreciate that you did is you took out the trash when I was busy doing something, and it was unexpected and I really appreciate it. And then, so that's the behavior. That's number 1. The second part of the appreciation, which could be rolled up into the first part, but is why that's important to you. So I really appreciated when you took out the trash when I was busy working on my blog. And that was important to me because I said I was going to do it, but I felt like you saw me busy and you just did it, like you wanted to help me out. So that's the second part. Why was it important to you? Why did it touch you? And then the third part is how it made you feel. So I really appreciate taking out the trash and I was busy. That was important to me because I was busy and it kind of made me feel like you.
How did it make you feel?
Well, I'm just going through the whole thing again.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh yeah. Okay. But it made me feel special and loved and cared for.
And I want to just say that oftentimes and this happened to me today, I was with a couple in therapy, and the partner shared how he appreciated something of his partner, and he started to cry. And it was very, very powerful because it was like he felt it. He really felt the appreciation on a deep level and how important it was that he received what he received. And so I think it's a beautiful thing to hear it. It's a beautiful thing to give it. To give an appreciation and say how you feel, you have to be in touch with your feelings. And that really is a nice message to send to your partner. So that was beautiful. So just again, if you could, the 3 steps.
So the first step is the behavior that you appreciate. The second, and this is, I think, really vital too, is why that's important to you. And then the third is how it made you feel. And then the advanced version of it, should you want to go that deep, which we recommend that you do if you ritualize this and do it on an ongoing basis, is to talk about like what that reminds me of in my childhood, something that I got or didn't get. And the reason that's so important is because it starts to uncover the childhood experience. And in the childhood experiences are things that are beautiful and lovely and it connects us, but also it highlights what we didn't get. And that's where a lot of the trauma is, or the programs that we have that we want to heal. And so uncovering that in a kind of fun and light way is super important for the relationship.
I've got another question.
Okay.
How do you prevent what you appreciate then becoming an expectation? For example, doing the dishes or being tidy then becomes expected.
Right. Great question. So I think the appreciations are like important for not having that happen. Because if I do the dishes for you, right, and then you don't appreciate it, then it feels like it's not appreciated, it's expected, right? But if I do the dishes for you and you go out of your way to appreciate it, then I know it's really important, and it kind of prohibits it from going into an expectation, because you're keeping it up here and you're reminding me that it's a special act.
Right. Yeah, it's hard not to go into an expectation. These are unconditional acts. Now, what you're talking about really is what I want to go into a little bit more. Not so much appreciations, verbal appreciations, but actual behaviors that you can do for each other, caring behaviors, we call them. But yeah, I mean, in this particular case with this question, these are unconditional gifts. If you could look at it that way, unconditional gifts. We all want to be loved unconditionally. We all want to be appreciated unconditionally. So the more that you can just keep that in your mind, that if I appreciate you, if I thank you, and I don't expect anything in return, then that's a true gift of appreciation. As soon as I expect something in return, then it's not a true gift anymore. Because true giving is giving without expecting anything in return. And it's a very high evolved place to be in relationships, but I think it's the place we all want to try to get to. Because then you move into a tit for tat type of situation, and we want to move away from tit for tat. Tit for tat in relation, you do this, I'll do this. Or, so we want to kind of move away from that.
Yeah.
So appreciations are powerful, and we ritualize them because, again, we're naturally geared toward finding the negative. And by having a ritual where we find the positive and we expand on it, it elevates the energy within the relationship. If it's done with a full heart. A lot of times we teach this to clients, and there's so much conflict going on that they're doing it with they're biting their lips while they're doing it. And I'm okay with that because they're starting toward the pathway. But the ultimate goal with the whole thing about positivity is to have it come from the heart, because if it doesn't, then it just feels like that shit-filled Twinkie, right?
Yeah.
When we want to create more positivity in our relationship, again, what we're doing is we're opening our heart and getting out of our head. Because in our head is only judgments and blame and criticism, and she's right, and she's wrong and I'm right, or I do more than he does, or he does more than I do. It's all those judgments that we have about ourselves and about each other. And the longer, when we're there, we're not in our heart. And when we're not in our heart, we're not in a positive space. And so these rituals are just super important to develop that. But again, you can go through a ritual of appreciation and have it in the head.
So Debbie and I have a ritual of appreciation that we do, I would say probably 5 times a week. We do it. No?
I don't think so.
No?
Maybe like twice.
Really?
Twice a week, yeah.
I think we do it.
Really?
More than that. Yeah.
See, it's become so easy for me now.
Yeah.
I don't know how long we're doing it.
And I just want to, one last thing about this appreciation is with Debbie, she doesn't offer them very often. So I ask for them. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I will say, can you give me an appreciation?
Right.
And she'll go through that process she just taught you. And it's great. And I don't mind asking because I know it will elevate the relationship. And then I give her, and then of course she wants one back. So I go ahead and give her one.
But this is one thing that you do that I wouldn't recommend.
Oh, really? You're going to share that?
I'm going to share it.
Okay.
So is that okay?
Sure.
You don't even know what it is.
Too late now.
Okay. We're going there.
Choice.
So what Craig does is he, and I've told him about this, but he forgets sometimes, is he says, can you please give me an appreciation?
And I say, like, wouldn't it be nice if you just said one day, like, I have an appreciation for you.
True.
And he does it sometimes, but he's more in the habit of asking for one.
Yeah.
Which I don't care. I think of it as, it goes back to that shift that I talk about a lot, which is annoying to adorable. Like, I could look at it and say, that's really annoying. I could get in my head, I could totally judge him, and it could create a whole thing of conflict. But I don't. I just say, he's adorable. I've told him this
I
10
am
times.
adorable. Aren't I adorable?
And he doesn't do it. So he doesn't do it.
Yeah.
So I get to ask, I'm the second person.
You see how these appreciations could turn into a whole argument if you're not careful. But no.
But anyhow, my point is you want to share it. But if one person's better at asking for it, they're better than asking for it. So
I have a comment. It says,
Yes.
but asking for an appreciation seems fake. Shouldn't the other person want to give one?
You know, part of it for me is it's not that I
It's a
don't
good
care.
question.
It's a good question. It's not that gratefully Debbie isn't fake when she gives it. I can feel her authenticity. I would imagine if she gave me an appreciation after asking for one and it felt really fake, that it wouldn't feel as good. So, you know, I guess, yes, you're right. A person has to be able to be somewhat authentic in the way they give an appreciation. And I think to do that, you do have to drop into your heart, and you got to be willing to play. Let's face it, it's somewhat of a game here. Will you play the game with me? I'm asking for an appreciation, and I would really like it if you could be authentic and drop in and actually give me a real
and
appreciation.
he does that sometimes. But I'll give you my spin on it. I think the question implies, it's kind of like the question, the root of the question is, if somebody doesn't give me an appreciation naturally, then I don't really want one. And it goes back to what we were talking about before. It's like we appreciate what he was talking about with the Swedish farmer. We keep the appreciations inside. And that's why it's so important to ritualize it, because I can guarantee you, even in the most troubled relationships, and we've seen this, if you go underneath, there is an appreciation.
There's something there.
Yeah. So the answer to your question is not really.
Yeah, and because some people are so uncomfortable giving them. I mean, like I said, a lot of people grew up in families where they didn't receive any appreciations, so they don't know how to give them. They don't know how to receive them. You got to start somewhere. And sometimes I know the term, you've all heard it, fake it till you make it. And sometimes you got to allow your partner to just say the words, even though it doesn't feel 100% authentic, to get them into practice, to give them an opportunity. And I guarantee they'll come along rather quickly.
How are we doing on time, Sarah?
We're good. It's 7:36. There was if you can speak briefly to it, a follow-up question to that. When I'm not used to giving appreciations, even if I try, it feels inauthentic. How do you fix that?
When I'm not used to giving appreciations, it feels inauthentic.
Right.
So how do I get more comfortable with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because anytime, it's the same example that I always give of riding a bike. When you get on a bike for the first time, it doesn't feel so good. It's scary. It's uncomfortable. You're not sure you're going to do it. You may fall flat on your face. And eventually you're riding a bike. And so a lot of times when we're playing with new skills and behaviors, especially if we have programming around all the reasons why we don't do this, it feels uncomfortable. And so I say, it will be uncomfortable, but eventually it won't. And I think that obviously the more you do it, eventually it's going to be not uncomfortable. But I would say that in a short period of time, you're going to find that. And it's really pushing your comfort zone. I believe, as many do, that here's your comfort zone. And if we live our life right in the center of it, nothing much happens. It's only when we go to the end of our comfort zone and we push those boundaries a little bit and we expand ourselves, that life gets more exciting. We expand ourselves and our possibilities. So I would embrace the discomfort.
And I think the structure of it helps. If you actually take the structure seriously, it was designed that way. One thing I appreciate about you is that that's important to me because, and when you do that, it makes me feel. If you keep to that structure, it will help you begin to feel more comfortable with the process. It takes 30 seconds.
Yeah, of all the couples that we've worked with, and I don't know about you because we don't do all of them together, but I find that the couples are exceedingly uncomfortable.
the first time. And then I have them go home and start practicing it. When they come back and we do appreciations in session, they're completely different. So I would say also you're not alone. I haven't seen an elegant appreciation on the first try.
So it's 7:39, and we do have a couple that volunteered
Oh,
to do
great.
some one-on-one coaching.
Great.
So
Okay.
Carlos, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and also spotlight your video. So see and unmute.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Carlos. And oh, wait, they're not, they're still
Still
muted.
muted. Oh, there we go.
Hang on. You're
Okay,
muted.
good to go.
They're good to
Are
go.
we good? Can you hear us?
Good.
Okay, so I'm Carol, and this is
Carlos, how are you?
Carol and Carlos.
Hi.
And one of our questions that we wanted some feedback, I can just read it because I wrote it out before. So how do you balance things when one person is tidy and organized and the other person is less structured? Carlos and we've been living together for almost 3 years, newly engaged. But one of our thank you.
Thank you.
But one of our constant sort of tensions that actually feels like it's sometimes chipping away at the positivity in our relationship is his standard of cleanliness is very, very high, and mine is not as high. And sometimes I just feel like even if I am sort of acting out of type and trying to be more clean and organized, it doesn't feel like it meets that standard. And so I think, yeah, we just would love some feedback, because even though it feels like a small thing, it does feel like something that's kind of always there and kind of always sort of like chipping away at us.
I think it's not, sometimes I feel some sort of resentment, like you're not helping me, you know? So it's sort of like, I don't want to say it builds up and then there is a fight, but there's a little bit of resentment, like I want you to keep up with me, our place clean, you know, in that sense.
And especially since this coronavirus thing has happened, I feel like for him and everything we've been experiencing recently, like it feels like he's more hyper focused on keeping things clean. And I'm a little bit more focused on sort of surviving, I guess, because I got laid off from my job. He's furloughed from his job. So we've been just kind of, you know, trying to figure all of this out. And it's kind of exacerbated those things, I think.
Absolutely.
Want to go first?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So first of all, I just want to say in general that, you know, when we're stressed out, and I think everybody's a little bit stressed out, and we want to feel comfortable in our homes. I know Craig and I have spent a lot of time cleaning, and, you know, we're on the same page with that, more or less. We have some differences. But when this all happened, it was really important for us to create a home that we felt comfortable in. And so my guess is that that situation has become more important with the shutdown, right? And I think it's a blessing that that's happened for you, because what it's done is it's highlighted a way that you're different. And it's kind of forcing you to say, okay, how do we deal with this difference? So I always find it helpful to drill down and just look at one particular thing. So if I were to ask you, like, what's one thing that you do or don't do that really creates one of those little things that you were talking about?
Okay. Like it's really hard. Well, when I don't do the dishes after we cook, and we cook every day,
right?
I know that it's very like challenging for him to like go to bed when there's dishes in the sink.
Right. Yeah. That was funny enough, one of ours, right?
Yeah.
When Craig moved in and we decided to get married and he moved in, before he moved in, I used to go to, I'm the cleaner one, right? On that level. And I used to go to his house and I'd see the dishes piled up like that. And immediately I thought, the first time I saw him, I thought, this isn't going to work. I've got an OCD thing, not with a lot of things, but with the kitchen and the dishes. And I thought, okay, it's it's his house, whatever. But when he went to move in, I said, listen, sweetheart, I'm a little OCD with the kitchen and the dishes. And so dishes belong in the dishwasher. They don't belong in the sink. And he'd say, no problem. I can do that. That's easy. And then like for the first few weeks, he's like, great. And I'm like, this is like great. He didn't do it as, I was impressed. And then over time, there's a dish, there's a spoon, there's a cup, and then there's full out dishes going on. And I'm starting to get annoyed. And then I would say to him, you know, sweetheart, remember, like, I'm crazy about the dishes. Can you just remember, like, just put them, like, don't leave them in the sink, just put them in the dishwasher. Yeah, no problem, no problem. Well, the next day or two, there's the spoon, there's the cup, there's the dishes, or, you know, a full on, you know, meal or whatever. And then I started getting really annoyed. Like, he just doesn't get it. He doesn't get how important that is to me. And so I started making up all these stories. He never does it. Whenever you go to never, you know you're in big trouble because it's not true. Right, Carlos?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
But you go there in your mind, right?
Yes.
You energetically say, she never does that. How many times do I have to tell her she never does it? When you go to never, you know you're in bad territory because you're in, like, it's just not true. You're in fantasy land. But that's where I was going. He never does it. Well, there's one shift that I talked about already that I'll bring up here. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to give you a little bit of something. And that is the shift from annoying to adorable. Because what Carol has become to you is annoying. And as long as you hold her in the space of being annoying, you're in the muck and nothing good comes from the muck. When we elevate the energy of how you hold her, then things kind of start happening. So with Craig, I remember going in there one day and I was up to here. Like, how many times I was totally down there in this annoying space. And then I thought, wait a second, you know better than this. You created this shift, annoying to adorable. And I took a few deep breaths and I looked at those dishes and I said, isn't he adorable? Look at him with the dishes. He just can't get the dishes right. It's so cute. And then he walked in to the kitchen. And because I had shifted to the adorable energy of him, and that was just as true, right? It was just as true. It's kind of cute. Like, he can't get it right, no matter how many times I've told him. When he walked in and I looked at him and I just saw adorable. And I said, it's not that the dishes are okay, just that my energy's changed, right? See the difference? So I looked at him and I said, hey, cutie pie, come here. Look in the sink. What do you see? And he'd say, oh, dishes. I said, yeah, they go in the dishwasher. And he says, I'm sorry. And he did it right away. Now, had I not shifted, then I would have said the usual, how many times do I have to tell you, you never do it? And I've told you so many times, and it's really, I feel like you're being really inconsiderate. You know, I would have gone down that path. And then he would have gotten defensive, right? And he would have said, I can't do anything right. It's just like nothing's ever good enough for you. The shift in energy is huge. And when we look at our partners, even if they're not giving us what we want, if we see them as adorable and see them as loving, then if we make a request, it's going to land because it's not putting them on the defensive and that's not putting them in a state of resistance.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's her perspective.
And it's true, like, sometimes it's not what you're asking, it's how you ask it.
Exactly.
Almost always.
Yeah.
Yes,
Almost
yes.
always.
And I feel like when he's like nitpicking, I do shut down.
Right.
But I feel like if he like would look at me and say, hey, like, you know, I love you and I know that this is a growth area for you, but it's really important to me that this takes place. I feel like that would definitely sort of, you know, open the way for me to be less resistant to that, for sure.
Absolutely. And Carol, you make such a good point. I just want to end on that. Is you shut down when he comes after you, right? And when you shut down, he feels unheard. And so he gets more frustrated. And it becomes the dance that you guys play.
Right.
That's why, Carlos, if you lead with love and adorableness, then she's not going to shut down and you're not going to feel unheard.
Yeah.
And you create a new dance.
Yes.
And
I am adorable.
Yeah, exactly.
You didn't think that.
For the sake of those who are listening, I love what you said, that this seems like such a small thing. And I hear that a lot. We argue about small things, but it is the small things where the most growth can happen, I feel. So even though this is a little thing, it seems that way, there's so much opportunity here for both of you to evolve your relationship and grow together. Just this little thing can repeat itself in so many different ways. So I'm really admire the two of you for taking this quote unquote little thing on.
And you know what? We so appreciate you being the first one to do this with us. You know what we'd like to do for you? We'd like to send you a copy of our book, The Mindful Couple.
Yeah.
Really?
No.
Oh
That
my
is amazing.
goodness. Oh my, I actually
We were just
wrote,
talking
we
about
were
it today.
just talking about this actually. And I wrote it down in my notes in all caps, buy the book.
Well, now you have your own copy. You don't have to buy one. And it has the 52 strategies, really, really simple, practical things that you guys can do. And we do recommend just kind of going through it one at a time. So we hope you have fun with it.
Yes,
will.
yes.
Thank you so much.
so much.
You're
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Appreciative.
I
Thank
Our
appreciate
you.
first
it.
couple.
Yay, thank you guys.
So,
The other thing, just quickly, is, you know, the dialogue that we talked about, I would love for you guys to practice with it. I'll send you an outline of it. And so the outline is, you know, just talking and having the other person mirror you so that you can get to the core and feel like Carlos is really being totally heard about how this makes him feel. I want to give Carlos an opportunity to really express himself about when you don't do the dishes, what that brings up for him. Okay?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
so how are we doing on time?
7:50.
okay.
7:50. Okay. Any other questions that?
There was one more. What is your take on social media and our significant others' access to it?
Okay. So, I mean, that's an interesting question because
You want to repeat it?
what the question is, what's your take on social media and your partner's access to it? And I'm assuming embedded in the question is that there's a difference in desirability of social media, right? I think embedded in the question is my partner doesn't do it enough, which I doubt that is, or my partner does it too much. And the problem, I think, if I were working with that couple, is one of disconnection. And I probably repeatedly asked him not to be on social media so much, and he's still there. And I'm guessing because I don't know if that's really what it is. I'm just kind of guessing. And without having somebody, if that person wants to chit chat, we could do that. But if I request somebody to get off their social media, that person can say, what a nag, doesn't let me do what I enjoy. I'm just on my social media, for God's sakes, right? And what they're failing to see is that what that person's really saying is, I want your attention. It's a bid for connection. I love you so much, and I want to connect with you. And when you're on your social media, it feels like there's a disconnect. Is that from? No, that's not from. So anyhow, and so I would say to the person who's on their social media more is to recognize your partner's desire to connect with you. Rather than see it as a negative criticism, see it for what it is deep down inside. And that is, I love you so much, and I want a little bit more of your time.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Question for Debbie. Have you ever refused to give Craig an appreciation?
Have I?
She's never refused, but she's often said, you give me one first.
Well, that's not refusing, but that's
No.
just back to my point,
Right.
my prior point.
Right, right. No,
No, I don't
she's
think I
always
have.
given me one. It's always been a positive.
Yeah, that would be kind of a real negative, I think. If somebody asks for an appreciation, because that's a bit of a vulnerable point, is to say, I'd like an appreciation. And if somebody said no,
Yeah.
that would be really difficult.
Yeah.
So even if you're not in the mood for it, like give something.
It's such a short period of time to give one. Want to give one and do one real quick just to show them how it works?
Okay.
Okay. You want to give me an
You
appreciation?
give me one. See,
Okay, I'll
see
give
what
you-
I'm dealing with?
I'll give you an appreciation, sure.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Okay. So let's see. One thing I appreciate about you is, let me think for a second. So I'm trying to think of the last 24 hours because I want it to be current.
See, he thinks while I'm giving him an appreciation.
Yeah, that's true.
It just
I get
like
a
the
little
light
time to
bulb went
think.
off.
No,
Okay, go ahead.
no. One thing I really appreciate about you is
Mhm.
how you handled we have a proofreader who's helping us with our website. And I really love the way you handled the phone call today with the proofreader. You were so clear, and we did it together. It felt like such a team and working together with this proofreader, and just the whole process of working on our website with you just made what was special to me about that is it just showed me that we can take a project and work it through together. And I really feel connected with you because there's so many opportunities for breakdowns with the when we're working together, right? Different ways we do things, but there was, and I could feel at times there was some potential for breakdown, but we just stayed at a high level and we worked through it, and it really made me feel like we were a team. So thank you.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you.
30 seconds.
It's easy. 3 parts. Okay. Any
How
other
are we
questions?
doing with time, Sarah?
It's 7:54.
Okay.
There was and I had a follow-up question. The 6-to-1 ratio is really interesting, but what if when something bad is happening, does that mean you have to give 6 positive things to counteract it?
It's probably a good idea. If something bad is happening, you guys are in the muck, and so you want to kind of get into repair mode. But it's really like what you're noticing. When something bad is happening, it means you're noticing more bad. It's just the way we're designed. It's the way we're wired. And when I start noticing more bad and more bad and more bad, we're going down the rabbit hole. So to start noticing and appreciating things that are going well helps elevate you out of that hole. So it's a good idea. And whatever you notice and whatever you appreciate, you're going to get more.
Yeah, you want to become, you definitely want to become a positivity watchdog, you know, and you really have to be looking throughout your day and observing, become more observant, become more noticeable what your partner's doing that you appreciate, and make mental notes. And if you need to, write them down, right? Make written notes about.
I think it's because we want to live up to our partner's expectations. You know, so the story I like to tell is of my roommate when I was in my 20s, and I lived with 2 guys that were absolute slobs. Like why I chose them, I'm not sure, but there I was in this house in my, wasn't even 20, I think I was 19. It was right out of right in the second year of college. And this one guy, he was like the worst vacuumer, and the carpet was dark maroon. This is back in the 70s. And it would drive me crazy when he would vacuum, because he would just, you could see exactly where he went, and it wasn't many places. You know, he would never move anything. And I was sitting on the couch and I was watching this whole thing happen again. And he happened to move a plant. And I was like, I can't even believe he did that. And I was a psychology student, so I'm going to use some of my psychology. And I said, shit. I said, you know what? I love it when you vacuum. Okay, I stretched the truth a little bit. And he said, why? And I said, because when you vacuum, unlike the rest of us, you really take your time to move things and go around where the dust gets. And, you know, when we do it, we just like, we don't care as much as you do. And so I just really appreciate when you vacuum. From that point on, the man vacuumed like a pro. And why that was, is he knew that I had an expectation and appreciation of him being up here, and he wanted to meet it. And that is so important because it works both ways. If I expect that you always show up a certain way and it's a positive way, you want to show up that way. All the ways that I compliment you all the time, you want to live up to that. And the same thing's true in reverse. If I'm constantly criticizing you and telling you all the things that you don't do, it's like, what the hell? You know, I can't win. I'll never, you know, so we want to show up to meet our partner's expectations, whether positive or negative.
So I think that I had a whole nother section on caring behaviors, which is a whole nother form of appreciations, actual behaviors that we do that make each other feel loved and cared about. We're going to have to hold off of that. I want to thank you all very, very much for your joining in on this community. We are a community. We're a community of couples or people who are relationship oriented. I give you so much credit for taking the time to want to work on your relationship, to grow your relationship, to make your relationship a #1 priority. You know, in our work, the way we feel, there's nothing more important than your relationship. You can learn so much from it. You can grow so much as an individual, as a couple, in how you parent, in how you are with your parents. And so I really appreciate your being here and taking the time to learn, to grow, because our motto is heal the world one couple at a time. So we're all healing the world by healing our relationship.
And I just want to say, not that I want the last one.
You want to give me appreciation?
No, I just want to say one more thing, that we started this for couples because we're couples therapists. And I've had a lot of friends say, well, I would tune in, but I'm not in a relationship. And I do believe, and we both believe, that we're in relationship all the time. We're in relationship with ourselves. We're in relationship with everybody else that we know, our family and friends. And we're in relationship with the world. And so everything, I would say 80%, like people ask, like, does this apply to individuals at all? And we think that about 80% of that book applies to any relationship you're in. So whether you're single or in a relationship, we really want to open this community to anybody who cares about being in a relationship and making it better. So
Great. Have a good night. We
Thank
look
you.
forward to seeing you
next
again.
week, I think we're going to be talking about forgiveness and letting go. Because we're talking about positivity and creating a vision. There's so much we didn't even talk about with positivity. But in order to get there, sometimes there's baggage that we have to let go of. And so we're just going to be hitting on that topic next time.
Yep. Okay, have a beautiful week.
Thank you, guys. Hope to see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.